super excited to talk about this. We've been talking about AI, and I think for quite a while now. And at Frog, it's been top of mind and part of our practice for over like a decade now. But now we're starting to see things manifest. But it's been kind of behind a screen, behind a chat interface. And now we're going to talk about what it means when AI coming out into the real world. So, how many people in the room have actually heard the term physical AI? Okay, so some. We're going to go pretty deep on that in the short time we have. I wanted to just quickly sort of open up though with a little bit of a simple provocation. So, as we weave intelligence into the world, it's a question that we're actually all struggling with. But right now, intelligence sort of like the access to intelligence and bringing human intelligence and artificial intelligence together is primarily a one-to-one type of interface. Like I prompt, I get a response, I share that response with the people around me. But now that we start to embed intelligence into the world, there's new types of design dynamics that we have to sort of take into account. So very early on, design was very much about, the shape of the world it gave was form and function. At Frog, we always used to say, or our founder, Hartman Esslinger, would say, form follows emotion. So at Frog, we always design with the idea that emotion leads and form follows. But design was really about how things work, right? And then it became about interfaces and experiences and scaling those into large organizations. And then it became something a little bit more with the idea of physical AI, this notion that everything in the world could be potentially like an entity or an agent that's moving around me and sharing the space with me. So one of the things we're going to unpack here is what it means to have these things share the space with us. How do they recognize the world around us? How do they recognize us? And then what is the personality? What is the character of these objects? What does that need to be? Because I'm sure has anyone actually ever stood in front or with a humanoid robot? So a few of you. I can tell you, it's very alarming. It feels weird. It's a bit of a creepy feeling. And it's one of the questions we think about at Frog a lot is like, what does that future look like? And how are we shaping that? So that's one of the things we're going to unpack here. It's interesting, Leonardo, it's great having you here with us because
Thank you.
Is anyone familiar with Archetype AI? Leonardo will give you a little bit of an overview, but what's interesting here is that we've got all this data floating around us. We have tons of sensors, tons of data types, and we had this world where big data was going to solve everything. We're going to know everything. We're going to have sort of an omniscient point of view. But that didn't really come to be. Like the IoT space, there was a lot of failure there in terms of how those things basically collected data and then gave it back to us. We didn't have the systems to really understand that. So there's tons of just data floating around out there that has value, and Archetype is actually starting to bring more value to that data, and it's a big piece of the puzzle to shape things. So I'll pass it to Leonardo to dive into that a bit.
Yeah. I think there is this current narrative around physical AI that is evolve around this idea of humanoid robots, right? Everyone that talks about physical AI talks about humanoid robots these days. And robots belong to a tradition of like technology that we have built to do tasks on our behalf. And that's good and exciting, especially with this new advancement in technology. Now they can do things in an environment that are very ambiguous and complicated. They can do more things. But I guess my point is like, there are more opportunities out there around physical AI, and we shouldn't get stuck on this single vision. And that is part of what we are doing at Archetype AI. The idea is to look at physical AI from a different lens. If you think about like, microscopes, telescopes, stethoscopes, or MRI machines, humans have built tools and instruments to understand the world around them and to go beyond the limits of our cognitive system, our senses as well. And so AI could be part of that lineage too. AI in the physical world can help us understand what's happening around us and reveal information about the world that we couldn't understand before. And that's what we are doing at Archetype AI. We are building this intelligent layer that take as input, sensor data and translate them into data, into information, to meaningful information that people can use to make better decisions. What is interesting to me that at the end of the day, right? The technology behind these two conceptualization of physical AI, like as a robot or as an instrument, they are quite similar. It's an AI that is situated in the physical world, that is able to sense the physical world through sensor and reason about it. What it changes is, like with robots, we are delegating our agency as the ability to act on the world to the AI. With instruments, this agency stays with us and help people make better decision about the world. This is to say not that one is better than another, but it's just like, let's look at this as a spectrum, as a spectrum from robots to instrument, and think about what is the right form and shape the AI can take, rather than getting stuck on one single narrative.
Yeah. I want to throw out a little bit of a provocation, which will sort of set up Ina to talk about the characters and personality of intelligent things in the world. Um, Physical AI, I think we just assume it's robots, right? We often talk a lot about what it means to build ambient AI, AI that just sort of exists in the space. So imagine walking into this room and there is either one or several entities that are doing different things in this space. They're either watching your facial expressions, they're tracking your emotions, they're monitoring the temperature in the room, but they're all coordinated and coming together to create some kind of orchestrated outcome. That's the type of thing that we're talking about, and it's interesting with Archetypes actually building that sensing layer to orchestrate something like that. But I'm curious, like how you all sort of think about that concept of ambient AI.
Yeah, I mean, it's currently our focus is on industrial automation. So we are helping the industry enterprises to make sense of their physical equipment. But of course, it's always been at the top of our mind that this technology can also power a new generation of consumer device that lives in the space with us. It can augment the things we use on our everyday life. So that they can anticipate our needs, or they can coexist with us in a way that is more, not only more productive, but really more even fun, emotionally connected with us.
I wanted to give you just a quick chance to talk about what we were seeing in the video a minute ago. If I can get that video to play, we will give it a shot.
Yeah, this is one of our first demo where we were using like a radar technology, and you can see how our model, our foundation model that we are bringing from scratch, is translating a signal like the radar into a textual description. And so this is, at the end, is the core idea of Archetype AI. We are taking any sort of sensor signal and we are able to make sense of it and translate it into a description, code, or anything that can be used to do different things, from industrial automation to ambient computing.
Yeah. So you're in a sense creating a new type of extra sensory layer around the entire world, but we can apply that sensory layer to new objects and different entities in that space. And we've been working on some new concepts at Frog that I wanted Ina to talk about. So imagine what Leonardo was just talking about as a new type of potentially brain and other extra sensory layer that these objects, these types of entities can embody.
So I think for us, we're really thinking about the space of physical AI and what does it mean to live among physical AI, right? So as like right now, everybody is interacting through chat interfaces, but thinking about what does it mean if objects actually have AI? What does that mean for us? And how might we think about our environments with that? So, a big realization for us was actually looking at how advanced the technology has become. And we're really seeing, humanoids, arms, all kinds of technology being brought out of labs, being brought out of manufacturing facilities, and because the technology is advancing, people are really seeing like, oh my gosh, there's so many different applications in the world. And there's so much excitement about this that people are just taking those and putting them into all these different spaces. And, for us, we look at, what does that mean? What is the quality of the space? What's the quality of experience that we're creating? And what kind of culture are we creating when we do that kind of lift and shift from one space to another? So we've really been thinking about, why is it that people are doing this? Is it fundamentally kind of the requirement for these products to have the properties of arms and other things, or is there something else out there? And so we started this research project to really think thoughtfully about the space. And we went right into the home, because this is a place where it's really filled with ritual, really thinking about, why is it that we bring certain objects and certain products into our homes? And what does that mean for us? And so we started by thinking about, what is it that we want these objects to do? Initially, we were, like everybody, we're excited about robotics. We're thinking about what happens if we put a robotic item into our product, into our homes. But kind of some of the first instantiations, which was really interesting, is we ended up with these ideas where this robot was all of a sudden doing things that we actually wanted to do. And at that moment, we thought, okay, well, let's go back. Like, what else could we be doing to think about this? And we started to change our language. We started to ask, okay, what if we instead what do we want to automate in our lives? What do we not want to do anymore? And what might the properties of that be like? What are the metaphors that we might want to take into that system? And so what you're seeing here is our kind of research platform, GNOME, for thinking about how do we bring physical AI into our spaces. And so this takes much more inspiration from things like furniture, from appliances, and as something that feels more appropriate to have in our spaces. I think we'll be talking about some of the other elements of it, so I'll take a pause
You said
here.
something interesting. You said we put these things in spaces, and the conversation we were having earlier about these things having character and personality, you had said something interesting about it's not you put these things in spaces, you introduce them to the space, and you sort of let them go in. You give them permission to be in the space.
Totally. I think it's, these are products that we're putting into human spaces, and I think that's an important distinction to recognize, and also important to recognize that maybe all spaces that humans inhabit are human spaces, so for one. The other thing is, we're thinking really deeply about what is the difference between these types of products and any kind of products that we had before. And I think, previously we're designing things that are have a one-to-one relationship between what you think they're going to do and what they end up doing. So, you can think about all of the different use cases, the edge cases, and you design for that. And if you have that object, it'll do that. But we're now entering a world where these are agentic objects. And so what that means is that their output is non-deterministic. They might do something that you never expected. And that's great, because you want them to be helpful, you want to be able to communicate with them very flexibly. But what that actually means is the quality of the interaction and the quality of being next to these objects means that we're really living amongst characters. And so because of that, things like the way we interact with them, their personality, their movement, their behavior kind of becomes much, much more important and is like integral to the medium itself.
Yeah, I feel like we have designed technology both on screen and in the real world, taking inspiration from the way we interact with physical world. Right, we press button, we move slider. There is that sort of like mental model that we have derived from how we interact with the physical world. But as we are introducing this new level of agency in the world, maybe we should start looking also at the social world and how we interact with each other. So start to understand how these devices can understand little, the aspect of our nonverbal communication. Like someone is approaching me, someone is leaving, someone is looking at me. These are all signals that a robot needs to understand in order to properly belong in the space we live together.
And then, what do they communicate back?
I think this is such a fascinating question because, because they are now social beings, and it's something that, one thing that happens when you interact with another human is we naturally have embedded in our code of how we work to give signals of how we're going to behave next. And I think that's something that we take a lot of comfort in. We kind of understand each other's personal space. We understand If somebody is moving in a certain direction, that they're about to walk into that direction. And so now, thinking about the legibility of these systems is something we think very hard about, is what is how do they signal intent, right? You don't want these objects to all of a sudden wake up and do something that you're not expecting. I think that I'm hearing some laughs, so I think that there's agreement that would be a little bit unsettling. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about, how to make their behavior legible. How do we communicate that intent? So the first interface for a robotic system is really its form. So that's kind of encodes what kind of behaviors it can have, what it could ever do. And then the second one is really movement and behavior and personality.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you were talking about that. There's something that came to mind is when it comes to posture and legibility of intent and what that's signaling. I'm just imagining the pickup bot, the gnome bot, I left a sharp object on the floor by accident, and it was kind and it picked it up. But if I see gnome coming towards me with a sharp object, what is it doing in terms of its posture, its body language to communicate to me that it's not attacking? And to even try to predict that that's going to happen and account for that, you're essentially designing for potential context, for potential situations.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about these social interactions with this object. But I think what is interesting to me that sometimes we think about these social interactions like, it should replicate what we do as humans. And so it has to be a fully very complex dance that we do when we meet with each other. This is a small project, a project we did at Google, where we were trying to use sensor to understand nonverbal interactions. In this case, we were able to understand different aspects of nonverbal communication, like when someone was approaching or leaving, when someone was just passing by a device, for example, or even turning around and looking at them. And we use this sort of new vocabulary for social interactions to design the way the object around us can respond to us. In this case, you can just glance at something and it provides more information, for example. Or you can, when you leave, for example, go back to what it was doing before. And you can start thinking about a lot of these very simple micro interactions that make your relationship with technology more legible in the end. It doesn't need to be a full-blown social interaction with your Roomba, for example, right? You just don't want to talk to them, I guess. Maybe you do. But the fact that it acknowledges, right, that you are there, even just simple, I don't know, if it's a little change in shape or an LED, just knows that I'm here. And so maybe when I'm here, it's not coming nearby me because it annoys me. So these little moments that we can try to understand and design, because the expectations are increasing, especially if you go with humanoid robots, you expect to interact with them as they were human because they look like humans. So, but going in the direction you guys are going, I think it's way more interesting because also the expectation that you have with these devices are different. And so how you design the social interactions with a device that doesn't have eyes, for example, right?
I was curious if you could just, we were talking about the use case you were designing for in terms of traffic flow with the city of Bellevue. I wonder if you could just set that up for us a bit, because some provocation I want to add on top of that.
Oh yeah, we are working with a small town in Washington State where we are using the cameras that they have at intersections to detect what they call near misses. So they are accidents that are about to happen, but they didn't happen. And so our model can understand when these events occur. Like for example, a car that almost hit a pedestrian or a bicycle. And they're using these to basically create these sort of risk maps of the city. And so then this again, it's like an intelligent layer that allow these people then to intervene and change the design of a certain intersection, for example.
Yeah, and then we have let's say we have autonomous vehicles moving through that intersection and vehicles being driven by human beings, and then you have an anxious sort of pedestrian that runs across the street. You're going to get different reactions from those different entities. But with Archetype AI adding a new layer of sensing on top of that, there's a communication that gets fed into there. But it immediately gives us the ability to change the posture, the dynamic of those objects, those autonomous vehicles, even a car being driven by a human being. You could imagine that the steering wheel in that car somehow changes a little bit of its texture or its feel based on the data that's fed to it in real time. But I think this is what we're trying to get at when you talk about the idea of legibility, and that gets communicated back into the objects, into the world.
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the pieces that we're working on with GNOME, is that, there certainly is this human machine interaction layer, but underneath that, there is a very, very large kind of technology layer, which is interpreting the world, understanding, is it two people that are talking at the same time? Is it, is there something in the environment which is unexpected? And really, the sensing layer is critical in order to make any of this work. It's really something that is integral.
Yeah. I'm curious, Leonardo, like where do you see, because we've got a few minutes left, I'm curious where you see all this going. Like what's the sort of future with physical AI?
Oh boy, I don't know.
You got 1 minute.
I got 1 minute. I don't know. I think I think you touched a little bit. I think like we keep thinking in terms of individual devices and how we interact with them individually, because in the physical world that's how we interact with each other. Each person is its own thing. But these devices are not individuals. They belong to a larger network of devices or robots. And I think that super intelligence that exists on top of everything is probably a bit scary, but could be quite powerful. We're working in the industrial sector, to the fact that you can control what's happening in a factory and predict when things are going to break. It's very powerful. Just one last thing on this. I was thinking actually while we were talking, we always talk about how the humanoid robots give us expectation of social interaction, but at the end of the day, they're not that socially intelligent right now, and so they don't meet our expectation. But what if the opposite is true? What if they are more intelligent than we are? We try to project like what we expect another human will do, but they're probably superhuman from a certain point of view, because they know more, because they are connected to every other robot in the world. So how do we manifest that sort of like layer of intelligence in a device that is not, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I pulled up this last little slide here, this day in the life, because we as designers, we often think about the journey and how people move through day to day, how they use interfaces to navigate the world, how they use objects to navigate the world. But now there's so much potential variability built into like any design problem, that you have to just basically think, you have to start thinking about, how a moment can just change at any second. So it's not a static guiding people through things anymore. You have to think about how a system is going to be reactive and non-deterministic. So the idea of designing personalities and entities that go into that space, it's an interesting new sort of dynamic for designers to be working in.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting too. And one other kind of nuance to that is, I think we're also entering a place where we can have more than one personality, which, different households, different like spaces might have a different, like it might be more appropriate to be playful in one situation, be a little bit more reserved in another. I think it'll be really interesting when people start to play with that.
Yeah, we've often thought about a lot of the things we got wrong in the social media era from a design perspective. Like even a lot of us were responsible for designing the concept of a feed, like the interaction model of a feed, without even thinking about what that meant. And I think now it is very much about understanding the consequences of releasing sort of non-deterministic things with personalities into, they're not fictional things, they're real things.
I completely agree. And I think actually that moment was a moment where I feel like a lot of designers started to feel a stronger responsibility and just acknowledge that the things that we're designing have consequences. And I think for us, that's one of the reasons that working in physical AI at this super early stage felt, not only super fascinating and interesting from a design perspective, but just important, because this is, I think, a space where now is really the time to explore. Now is the time to think about what are the different paradigms, to show that there might be other paradigms that we all aren't looking at. So super exciting time, I think, for physical AI.
No, I think we are lucky in a way, because it's a very rare moment in your career where you can find yourself in this position where there is new emerging technological layer, and we have the opportunity to shape it and try to do the right thing. And for me, like there is a dominant narrative that has been, proposed today, and the first step is really to try to look at that critically and see what else we can do. Is it actually the right thing of going about this physical AI, or there is other things we can do?
Well, with that, we promise to design nice, helpful, respectful entities that'll share the space with you. So thank you.
Thank you.